Well, I think a lot of the things which I am going to speak, or the basic theme of this session, is something which, at least from somebody in the government or from the Indian government side, will be repetitive. So I do not want to go into too much of the same thing which you have been hearing over and over again, that India is probably the largest market in the free world, and therefore everybody would like to come to India and do business here, and nobody would like to be left out in this huge market and the emerging opportunities arising out of this big market. So that, I'm sure, the statistics are well known to everybody, and everybody knows that why everybody wants to do business in India. And of course, we were talking to the gentleman from Telenor, who has been in the news earlier because of whatever happened in the telecom sector. And he was giving us a little bit of an insight that they've been here, they've gone through the roughest of times, but yet in the last 3 years of their operations, they are finding that they are going to break even. So it is, and that also after their business out of Mumbai, which is the biggest or probably one of the most profitable circles, they've had to pull out, and they are not existing a pan-India at the moment. But at that notwithstanding, they have got 25 million customers. And I'm sure when they go in for more circles, they bid for new circles, they will certainly be a big player in the Indian market. So that itself, the small limited introduction he gave us about his company, I think answers it all. And why would anybody be looking at coming into India and wanting to do business? So that notwithstanding, there are other things also that people perceive India, of course, for the future, but I would like to put it in a very different way, that I think India is not achieving its potential, and largely it is also due to the kind of structures we have created over the years. One of them being government itself. I think Arun Shourie was talking about the way government works. I didn't get a chance to hear him fully. But at the same time, I can admit, while being on the side of the government, that we ourselves have been one of the biggest stumbling blocks in the way of success for the country. And the recent examples, I think when we came with UPA 1, everybody just thought that it's a change of government from the NDA, and therefore UPA will be a large coalition driven by the left and probably will not be able to show the way for the country. But UPA 1, in spite of all the limitations, could give this country a very good government and could probably be I would say, a path setter, the reason why we came back and formed UPA 2. But ever since we've come to UPA 2, if we see the way we have been functioning, I'm being a critic of our government and therefore may not be music to the ears of my colleagues, but I can certainly say that we, on many occasions, have been actually shooting ourselves in the foot. Look at sector after sector. Say the power sector, one of the, I would say, a sector with a great potential. India still lives in darkness. India still doesn't have electricity enough to provide, I would say, 6 hours of power for a home, for a bulb to be lit at the home. But still, we have not been able to get out of this morass. The reason is we have built-in activism within the system. We have built in a lot of roadblocks, which I think can certainly be overcome in a very, very simple fashion. And that is why when people like Chris are sitting here in this panel, I would like to say that look at the IT sector. It has truly demonstrated the aspirational change in India. It has shown that how young Indians who are in the age bracket of 18 to 25, they have built a new model for their future. If you just go by the numbers of the companies, TCS has got 250,000 young people working in their force. Chris has got 150,000 plus people working in their force. If you look at the force multiplier of this number, I think it itself is a reflection of what is possible in India. And that is truly the strength of India. That is the reason why people from all across the world, whether it's Telenor or anybody else, will look at India with a huge positive and would like to say that, hey, I cannot miss out to be in this place. And that, I think, is something which we all as a nation will have to explore and try to take advantage of this opportunity. Some ways, as I said earlier, we have missed the boat. But that's not the end of the road. I'm sure we can gather our resources back again, mobilize ourselves, and try to take India and catapult it into the next league. Now, we've been recently talking about coal and issues regarding coal and the scams involving coal. We have got 100 years of proven coal reserves in this country. And I'm sure that in 30, 40 years, coal, thermal power will become a redundant source of energy because the way the world is changing and the way the world is moving towards cleaner energy. But in spite of this, we go all the way to Australia, to Indonesia, to mine coal, bring it from there and try to use it in our power stations of India. Net result being that power projects are delayed, power projects are getting more expensive, the cost of power is getting more expensive, driving Indian business and making it uncompetitive, and also passing on the high cost of power to the consumer. So net result is that if we were to harness that coal within our own country and invest that same money instead of in Australia or Indonesia or South Africa or Mozambique into our own resources within the country, I think the opportunities would be infinite. And that is something which we need to look at sector after sector after sector. Sandeep, you mentioned about aviation. I mean, I don't want to talk much about it, but I certainly feel that if whatever we've done is just, I think, the tip of the iceberg. In India today, even after all this growth, what we see and you talk about, we have probably 3 to 4% of the population which flies only once a year. If 10% of India flew only once a year, probably the investment alone in one sector would be more than $150 billion required in the next 10 years. So that is the kind of, I would say, the force multiplier I was talking about, that if you replicate that model again and again and again over every sector, I think the opportunities, and except creating economic development in the country, except for the economic prosperity we need to bring to our country, I think there is no other model. Everybody talks about inclusive growth, everybody talks of a sympathetic approach towards a large section of our society, and that is absolutely the need of the hour, but how do you get the resources for that? I think very little people invest time and energy and effort into seeing that how are we going to generate the resource, and all this has happened in the last 20 years. The economic development, I think we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Everybody knows the model is in front of us. Pre-91, what was India? Post-91, what is India? I think the answer is very clear. And if all the opportunities, if Infosys was born, it's born post-91 in the real sense of the word. If anybody else has succeeded in India in big time, the new generation of businessmen in India, it is on the back of a 91 reform process which we took forward in India. So we cannot go back on that. We cannot slow down on that. I think if we talk of 5% growth, I was hearing Mr. Chidambaram giving his speech on the budget day and yesterday replying to the budget. I think we are talking of 5% growth. And that is true that 5% growth by any standards in the world, especially when you look at Europe or the US, it's fantastic, but it's nothing so good for India. And why is it 5%? Is it because of the global factors? Yes, it is. But it is not only because of the global factors, it is also because we ourselves have not been able to do as much as is required to make that happen. So I don't want to go into too much of detail. I'm sure the other speakers also. There are many people who would be wanting to ask questions to my other co-panelists. So without going into too much of further detail, all I can say is that yes, everybody looks at India with a future in mind, and I'm sure India itself has so much of potential and talent that we, from within our own country, can generate so much of potential for our country. And that is exactly what the generations of Indians are looking forward to. I don't want to extend my speech, but a new thought came into my mind. Somebody came to meet me this morning and said that they're doing some business in Africa. And they were saying that the way the entire African continent, country after country after country, is being taken over economically by China. And the way the things have proceeding, I think we really, all of us, need to wake up to the fact that there is so much more potential within the country and outside the country. And Indian businesses have demonstrated across the board, across sector after sector, that they are capable not only of doing extremely well within our shores, but even outside of India, they can go and be world beaters. I think that is an opportunity. India, while everybody is talking, and this session is talking of India from within, I think we also need to focus our energies and look at India outside of India. And that would be, I think, a change which will have to be fundamentally brought in. Indian businesses cannot just survive now within the shores of the country. If companies like Infosys or many others have to grow out of their current position and they want to continue to expand and be world leaders, I think they will also have to reinvent India outside of India. And that is exactly the point I was trying to make this morning when somebody mentioned to me about China. And it's not that we don't know about it, but I think it just re-emphasizes the fact that if we have to look at the future of India, we also have to look at within and outside. That is the limited point I would like to make. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to every one of you. When I saw the title, Fatal Attraction, two options, right? One, bring in the Indian mysticism to this, so on the title, fatal attraction, etc., or the negative connotation. So when I look at this topic, I thought I will share with you 5 points actually. First of all, India is a large market, a huge opportunity for every business, not just multinationals, companies from overseas. India is a huge market for Indian companies too. So when we talk about the challenges, it's true for Indian companies too. Sometimes we forget. We believe that it's only a problem for global multinationals, but it's a problem for Indian multinationals also, Indian companies also, small and medium enterprises, the engine of growth for any economy, engine for job creation for any economy, the small and medium enterprise. So it's a challenge for all companies. Second point I want to make is, if you look at the story of the IT services industry, and Mr. Praful Patel talked about it actually, truly we are seen as a showpiece of what the reform process has created. We are seen as the children of the reform process, the showpiece for the reform process in India. The point I want to bring about here is that this was an industry which had 100% foreign ownership from day one. Way back in 1993, when we were all extremely small, Infosys had a revenue of about $10 million at that point. We were employing probably about 300 people at that point. And we've grown significantly over the last 20 years, gone from 10 million to close to about $8 billion in revenue, 155,000 people. In an environment where competition was open, competition was possible, and the industry figured out how to compete, not just in India, but everywhere. And the point I want to make here is that we must trust the competitiveness of the Indian industry. We must believe that Indian industry can compete, as I strongly believe the Indian professional can compete anywhere in the world. So the industry can compete. And I strongly believe that a strong IT industry also means that there can be strong companies in every possible industry that we have in the country. And we are seeing that actually. We are seeing Indian companies acquiring abroad, growing abroad, and making their mark felt in other parts of the world. The third point I want to make is we are a society in transition. We are a society that is going through significant change in a very short period of time. We need to build institutions. Institutions have to be built from sometimes scratch as we develop. Now, we can look at other models, but we need to also remember that the time we're doing this is very different from the 20th century, where people have tremendous power in their hands by leveraging technology. Today, you can record something and upload on YouTube or something like that, and before anybody can stop, millions of downloads are possible. What does that mean? It means that you are always in public eye. You are doing things when, if even one person is going to oppose it, he or she can have a global voice around it. So we need to figure that out. And so it is all the more important to figure out how to make democracy work in the 21st century. And I believe that we would be probably one of the first countries to do this. And there are some difficulties to make that work because you need very strong visionary leadership that can actually paint a vision that will show what is at the end of this transition and the transformation. That is needed today more than ever, because then only people will believe that short-term pain means long-term gain. That means that this transition is worth it. The fourth point I want to make is about talent. Now, we have a very large population, but we need to make sure that this population sees opportunities in the transition that is happening. That means they need to be educated, they need to be made ready to take on the jobs of the future. Factories today require far fewer number of people. 30 years back, a factory would require probably, let's say, 100 people. Today, that same factory would probably require 10 people, 1/10. The type of work that you do is very different. It's probably not going to be manual work. It's probably more like software development, computer programming, robotics, and things like that. Very different type of work. So we need to make sure that we understand that. Agriculture, for example, will require far fewer people. 70% of the people are dependent on agriculture. We probably will come down to 3-5% of people depend on agriculture. So how do you transition all these people? And one of the things in the brief about the topic itself says everyone earns from India, but Indians remain poor. We have to make sure that they have jobs, they have good paying jobs, they have the education, they have the capability to participate in this transition. Businesses are going to feel challenged because they don't have the right workforce. And we are already seeing that, actually. There is a mismatch between what industry needs, what India's growth needs, and what our system is today producing. And we are, of course, all part of the system. The last point I want to make is about what kind of development that we need, what kind of products we need, what kind of growth that we need as we look forward. And this is also a very important point, because if we don't make the right choices as we grow, we will create an India that is unlivable. So 3.5% of people today own cars. 3.5% of people own cars. Now, India is a huge market for automobiles, because in a developed country, 50-60% of the people own cars. Now imagine what will happen to our roads, what will happen to pollution, what will happen to our cities if we don't change either the way we commute or we change the automobiles that we produce. So when we talk about the fatal attraction, to me, making the right choices, making the right path for development, making sure that we understand what this development would mean when we see a developed India. It's very, very important. Now, it is possible, and it's already happening, right? In 1991, approximately the per capita income was about $700, $800. Today, it's $1,500. We have already seen it doubling. It is estimated to be about $4,000, $5,000 by 2020. We are going to see development. Even if we continue to grow at 5-6%, we will see per capita income going up. At that juncture, what is the India that we would see? I think that is a very important question to debate, and we need to think about our cities, we need to think about the environment, we need to think about what kind of jobs, we need to think about what kind of governance, what kind of institutions we will have if we want to make sure that it's an attractive India that we get at the end of 2020. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me for this occasion, and realizing that I'm probably the latest person, the last person between you and the coffee, then I have to be brief on my comments. But I'd like to at least give one comment to Minister Patel, and that is that if every Indian are going up in the planes, they can use the mobile phone to get that connectivity established. So in a way, planes and mobile phones will, to a certain extent, compete in the future. So what can a Norwegian bring about on this afternoon to you? Norway, a very small country on top of Europe, with only 5, and I repeat, only 5 million people. So in this big setting here, it's sort of just a small dot anywhere in this country. Coming from Norway, being minus 10 centigrades outside yesterday evening when I left for India, coming here, that's also kind of different exposure. But we have some experiences in the Nordic countries on social democratic systems, which basically have worked all since the Second World War was coming to an end in the 40s. And if you look at the Nordic countries collectively under the democratic model, which is at play there, that model has basically delivered economic growth, distribution of revenue, and pretty good societies to work in. So in a way, we don't have the answer to democratic processes in other countries, but we have at least a reference and a story to tell around how these things have been done up through the years. And one of the very important cornerstones in that is the principles of equality. The principle of equality between people is standing very high in the Scandinavian countries. And we as Telenor, when we take that culture with us to our international ventures, also here in Asia, where of which there are 5, then we also try to use that equality kind of principle in our organization and how we develop our business culture. So there might be something there that in a way works in the long term. Compared to India also, our democracy is characterized by a great deal of consensus. There is a broad political consensus on the direction, but then there are, of course, different views on the means at play. There is also a high respect of institutions, and that institutions act both in a responsible way and that they are generally trusted. And in that sense, the institution building is very important the way we see it. So, to the topic that I've been invited to sort of be to say some words about how to address the Indian market, an enormous market by size, but not necessarily by affordability. Attractive, yes, and for us, not fatal, where we stand today. But it hasn't been easy. And the ability to stay the course and to have the stamina to go up against decisions or decisions to be with your arguments is quite a marathon run to take on. And in a way, it was a near-to-death experience to get the Supreme Court ruling in February 1 year ago. And it wasn't easy for us to say, we want to fight that one. Because to fight that one meant that our management and our people in the organization of Uninor really had to produce progress at the same time as having a fundamental insecurity as to whether there would be a license process that we could come through successfully or not. And remarkably enough, the business culture produced progress throughout the year, and remarkably enough, we participated in the auction, and we are there with licensed spectrum. And it's not the spectrum that we heard about previously this afternoon. This is spectrum paid for in a new auction process, and it's cleared for the coming years. So in a way, it's done, but after a very, very lengthy process. And the price tag for this, I think also the minister was touching upon. The price tag for this is at least 1 year of insecurity on investments in this sector. And we believe that when we see lower investments in a sector of our character for 1 year, then we will probably also contribute less to the economic growth potential of the country in that period. And it's widely known that the 10% added teledensity has a 1.2% added GDP factor in every country. And those kind of research work has been done in many markets as we go forward. So there is a price tag on this, on the economic growth to be seen. Who is then the ally of a foreigner coming to a new country? Who's my ally when Telenor decides to go for a market position in India? Well, a government should be a pillar of support in that sense by clarifying the terms of investments. And of course, that was the case under the licenses that were issued back in 2008 that basically was turned upside down by the Supreme Court ruling. And now the government has worked itself through another auction process, and we've got through that needle hole this time. Does that mean that there will be other points of time where the framework of this industry will be thrown up in the air and addressed once more? I think we are prepared for that, but we are also prepared to fight for our position in the same way as we had been doing through 2012. Coming to India then, can we rely upon the fact that government will be the voice of a foreign direct investor like ourselves? Of course not. We have to be our voice ourselves. But we should expect and we should see that the policymakers basically are sticking to a certain framework after such a license process that we've just seen have been completed. Then on the better note, coming to India is a learning curve in itself, not only by culture, but also by innovation. In this market, the level of competitiveness between people and organizations is extraordinary. The quality of our people that we have here in India is very, very high and very, very dedicated. And they compete very, very well with the rest of my colleagues in the Telenor Group, which counts roughly 30,000 people. And in that sense, there is a learning curve also industry-wise. You come here, you see different and other models in play, and you take them under your arm and you apply them in other markets. As, of course, we take things from other markets that plays in this market up front. So the learning curve is also on that dimension. My last comment today is that telecom is a phenomenal enabler. It's a phenomenal enabler, and it's taken for given by all the people in this room. But we have in the Telenor Group adopted very early the belief that the mobile phone was an instrument for everyone. And to connect everyone is a phenomenal tool to integrate people into the information flow in the society, and to have people connected on things that other parts of the society takes for granted. And the difference of being connected as to be not connected is so enormously important for the individual that we must never forget it. And in that sense, the job is not concluded in India. There are still a lot of people that should be connected, and not the least, the mobile internet side of it has not yet given a kind of national impact. This will only come as the industry managed to connect also the remaining part of the Indian population that still is not internet connected. And on that note, there is a lot of optimism in that marketplace going forward. Thank you.